Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this special global teleclass. I'm Jeffrey Hoppe with the Crimson Circle, and I'm here tonight with my wife, Linda Benyo. Linda, how are you doing tonight?
Great to be here.
Good. We're going to talk about energy vampires. Who's feeding on you? Are you feeling tired, drained, confused, and disoriented? It might just be that you have energy vampires in your life. They're feeding off of you and literally stealing your energy, and it's time to put a stop to this. It'll lead to healthier, more authentic relationships and a stronger sense of self-worth, and above all, a return of joy to your life. So here we are. Linda, I can feel all the listeners listening in from all around the world right now. It's kind of exciting. I know there's people from the United States and Canada, of course, Mexico, South America, Europe, just based on some of the registrations that we had before the class. I know there's people from all over. So we'd really like to welcome everybody, and glad that you're joining in with us.
Welcome, everyone. This is always wonderful for us to be able to connect with you.
And as we get started tonight, we'd like to thank Hilton Johnson and the Global Teleclass Group for this opportunity. This is our third time on Global Teleclass, and it's always an exciting audience, a lot of energy. So we invite you right now just to take a deep breath as we get into this topic tonight of energy vampires. Kind of a dramatic sounding title, but it's really happening out there. I mean, there's people who are literally feeding off your energy. We're going to talk about it tonight. We're going to talk about the symptoms, what to look for, and what to do about it. Another note as we get started tonight, I know there's a lot of people who are listening in who are familiar with Crimson Circle. You might have been following some of the messages for, a couple years, if not more. We also have a lot of new listeners. So Linda and I talked beforehand about the use of terminology and things that we discuss or things that, how do we put it for people who are new? So we're going to try to keep this pretty, I would say simple, pretty basic, but it's a fascinating topic. We could literally talk about it for days and days and days. It's a fascinating topic because we're all consciousness beings. I mean, at our core, we are consciousness. We're not the bones and the physical being or just the mind. We're actually at the core, we're consciousness. And as beings of consciousness, we use energy in our everyday life to create our reality. Other people around us are consciousness beings who also use energy in their lives to create their reality, their jobs, their relationships, their passions and their interests. And it comes to a point where, we'll get into it tonight, but where some people are literally taking energy, stealing energy. We call these energy vampires. They're not necessarily doing it consciously. They're not doing it to try to do you any harm. It's just patterns that they get into. And, we'll talk about it in just a little bit. I wanted to also mention that we have a special offer tonight. We don't actually like selling products on the program, but we do have a special offer for a free product. It is a download of an ebook called The Creator Series, New Tools for Your Spiritual Journey. Some really amazing messages that were brought to us by Tobias a number of years ago, but some of the core material talking about how to be a creator in your own life. Okay, well, Linda?
I'm smiling right now because, again, I can see the emails coming in, and there are people that seem clearly aware that there are issues with energy and people feeding. And I think it's very, very indicative of the consciousness right now in the world and the awareness. It's no coincidence that young people are extremely taken by this whole concept of vampires and even things. There's the TV show about the vegan vampires, about this whole...
No, come on, you got to be kidding. Vegan vampires.
I am not kidding. They're vampires that have decided it's no longer appropriate to feed. So I think there's no coincidence in that. I think this is very indicative of the awarenesses and the energies that are shifting in the world.
It's a really big topic. It's a hot topic. And I think a lot of times people have issues in their life and they're not really sure where those issues are coming from. And hopefully tonight we can offer some perspective and some awareness about that oftentimes it is other people energetically feeding on you. So just a little background for the people who aren't familiar with Crimson Circle or Linda and myself. Actually, Linda and I have been doing workshops and seminars for the past 10 years dealing with material about spirituality and divinity. During our 10 years of doing this, we've traveled to over 25 countries. We travel about 125,000 miles a year. And we talk about subjects related to spiritual awakening, living in the new energy, integrating the human and divine, and higher consciousness, and what all these topics are about. Well, over the years, we've worked with a lot of people, and they've shared stories with us about the abuse that they've experienced in their life. Physical abuse, emotional abuse, mental abuse, and psychic abuse. So in 2006, we actually created a very special workshop for victims of physical abuse. We now call it the Sexual Energy School, and before you make any assumptions about that, it's really not just about sex, but it's about how these energies, which ultimately can be translated into feelings about your masculine, feminine self, how these energies really can lead to they have led to abusive situations in your life. Well, while we were talking to people, we quickly realized that this sexual energy school applies to people not just who have had known sexual abuse in the obvious sexual abuse, but they've had various types of physical, emotional, or psychic abuse in their life. Since we actually started that school, over 20,000 people around the world have taken the class, and over 2/3 of them say that it has been life-changing for them. So I would say that together with the people in Crimson Circle, we've had a lot of experience in dealing with these different types of abuse issues, and often times it's because of there's people feeding off of them in their lives. Well, let's talk right away actually about a few of the terms that we're going to use. Feeding is a term, and that just means somebody who's taking energy from you, whether they're doing it deliberately or not, but they have their tentacles into you, they have their energetic hooks into you, and they're feeding. Well, this gives them a sense of temporary well-being or fullness, but of course it doesn't last very long, and they have to continue the feeding sooner or later. We're going to talk a little bit about using a term called energy virus. We could actually talk for a long, long time about this, but this is what you would say would be a virus of consciousness. It's kind of like what would be a cold or a flu to the physical body. Well, this is an energy virus that's in consciousness, and it has to do a lot with the imbalance of masculine, feminine energies within each and every one of us. This virus is not part of a conspiracy. It doesn't belong to anyone. It's just there. It's prevalent, and it actually is something that is really causing people to feed on others, whether they know it or not. We're also going to use the terms victim and abuser. Now, some people will argue the use of those terms, but just for simplicity, a victim is somebody who is had abuse in their life. The abuser is the one carrying out that abuse. And I think it's fair to say that just about everyone has been a victim, and really also just about everyone has been an abuser in one way or the other. We're going to talk a little bit about what we're going to term entities. By entities, we mean the non-physical beings. I believe that there are non-physical beings all around us. There are angelic beings around us. Some of them are very, very high consciousness, here to help us, here to work with us. But there are entities that tend to hang around that, even though they're in the non-physical state, they're also feeding on us. They do a type of psychic manipulation. I know a lot of people that we've talked to over the years actually experience this in what I call dream invasions, where they literally can come into your dreams. Well, actually, other people can come into your dreams. These are actually types of psychic abuse that take place. And then we're also going to talk about self-love and compassion. Self-love is not a narcissistic thing. Self-love is about the acceptance of yourself, the ability to love who you are, everything that you do, everything that you are, to really be in love with yourself, because how can you love someone else? How can you share that with someone else if you don't love yourself first? And we're also going to talk about compassion. Compassion, to me, is the total acceptance of things, total acceptance of yourself, what you would judge to be good, bad, or whatever, the total acceptance of other people and their journey. It is really the understanding that, as Adama Saint Germain says, all is well in all of creation. So those are some of the terms that we're going to use tonight. A couple of important notes. We're going to explore the energy vampires in your life, and we'll actually ask you to think about who they are, even to write them down. But we're going to ask you not to place any blame.
Because that would be feeding.
Well, you're right. It is. That is a form of feeding. The moment, well, and then you get into the whole cycle of victim energy when you start blaming them. Really what we're trying to do is get you to be aware of this whole thing called energy feeding or energy vampires, but without blame. Without blame. In a way, you could say you're allowing them to do this, so how can you really blame them? And we're also going to take a look at perhaps how you are an energy vampire. That's right, because if somebody's feeding off of you, sooner or later you're going to start feeding off of others. It's kind of the human's way to get energy. When we take a look at some of the ways that you're an energy vampire, we're going to ask you not to get angry or judgmental with yourself, not to start beating yourself up saying, you're a terrible person for doing this. You know, everyone does. Everyone does. What we're going to ask you to do is quite the opposite, to really start to love yourself. So, let's take a deep breath with that one. A couple of important premises, a couple of considerations. First of all, everything is energy other than us. We're beings of consciousness or awareness. But everything else around us is energy. There's energy in the air. The material world around us is made up of energy. There's energy in our thoughts. There's energy in our imaginations and our dreams. They're all energies. If you could see this, it would be like energy waves or patterns swirling around us all the time. Right now, there's a tremendous amount of energy on this teleclass. Linda and I are sharing or putting out energy with you, and it's coming in waves, hopefully, or, well, knowingly, it's coming in waves of compassion, honor, and respect for you. Right now, where you are sitting, thinking whatever you're thinking, that's putting out energy patterns and energy waves. There's energy in the air around you. There's energy from mass consciousness. There's energy everywhere. And that's an important premise when understanding how people then are coming in and taking your energy. Second premise, there's plenty of energy to go around. Plenty of energy. It's not like the belief that some people have in money, that it's limited, or material goods, or fuel resources, or things like that. There is plenty of energy to go around. Creation is made up of nearly an infinite amount of energy. So when we talk about energy in this context, you don't have to worry that you have more than your fair share. You don't have to worry that it's suddenly going to disappear in 2 years or 5 years. In creation, there are tremendous amounts of energy, plenty to go around for everyone. Another important premise is that everything you need is already within you. All the answers all of the energy, all of the solutions, all of the understandings, your connection with spirit, with all that is, it's already within you. Such a big, important part of our journey is trying to rediscover that, or opening and expanding ourselves so we come to realize that, once again, everything is already there. There's truly not a thing that you need from the outside. It's just about remembering that everything is there. Next important point. No one can take anything away from you. No one can take anything away from you unless you allow it. So if people are energy vampires in your life, if they're feeding off of you, if they're not just taking your energy, but they're taking your money, they're taking your sense of well-being, at some level within you, you're allowing it. And final important premise, you can make a conscious choice to stop the energy feeding at any point. You can make a conscious choice to stop the energy feeding, whether it's people feeding on you or you feeding on them. It's as simple as that. You can make a conscious choice to stop. But if you do, be careful, because your life's going to change. The way you... Go ahead.
Just even your simple awareness will you'll see a change in the feeding. Just being aware of it will change it.
And it'll change your relationships, because you're no longer basing relationships, no matter what they are, you're no longer basing them on this feeding, this cycle of feeding, people taking from you, you taking from them. So you'll notice that first of all, your relationship starts to change. The people that you're not allowing to feed in you anymore, they're just going to go to someone else and start feeding off of someone else. The relationships that really are meant to go to a higher level, in other words, you can transcend the feeding process. You're going to discover there is an absolute beauty in those relationships that you might not have been noticing before. But that's just a little thing to say that you can make a conscious choice to stop the energy feeding, but it's going to change your life. So, what is an energy vampire? Like we said before, it's kind of a dramatic term, but an energy vampire is someone who feeds on you. They have their tentacles into you. They have their energy hooks and claws into you. They're stealing your energy. And as we said before, they're not necessarily doing it consciously. That's just the way that they have learned to cope or survive or to get their boost or whatever. Just like, you have to eat food to sustain your physical body. People have to have energy to sustain their consciousness here on earth. And oftentimes they go to others to steal that energy. They can show up as in a variety of different ways. They can show up as the people that you consider nearest and dearest to you in your life, people that you work with, and entities that aren't even in physical form. So how do you know if somebody's feeding off you? How do you know if you have energy vampires in your life? Well, one of the very first symptoms is that you're feeling tired and drained after being around them. Have you ever had it when you're having a conversation with somebody, or, well, I don't even want to call it a conversation, where they're talking at you, and when they finally leave, that you just feel drained, and you're like, thank goodness that they left. Well, they've been stealing energy. They're not just doing it in the words that they speak, but literally as they're speaking, as you're somewhat distracted by the words they're saying, they're at one level or another going in and just kind of munching, kind of stealing your energy. And that's why you feel tired and drained afterwards. And
you know what, I will tell you that just from reading what's coming in here and just kind of monitoring, there does seem to be an awful lot of people aware of the fact that they understand what that means to have somebody, literally a vampire of their energy, and even wondering about things like chronic fatigue actually perhaps being generated from the feeding, and being in relationships where they just know that they're always tired.
Always tired, yeah. That's probably one of the biggest signs is you're always tired, and especially, if you're with people and you find yourself then going off on your own, you just feel drained. You barely have enough. And it's actually an important consideration here, because you're drained. There may be a tendency for you then to do some energy feeding, whether you're doing it consciously or not.
Well, in questions, I've even seen several people asking that when you're in a relationship with a mate, for instance, what does this mean when they always need you? They don't just want you; they need you, and they feel so pressured. And I see numbers of people, referring to that.
Oh, that's great. Well, let's definitely make time for questions then. Another one of the symptoms, another thing to be aware of, if you have a cold, empty feeling after being with someone or while you're with them, if you just feel empty and you feel cold inside, because again, as they're stealing energy from you, it depletes you, it wears you out. I know a lot of people take vitamins and try to do all these things to re-energize themselves. But if somebody's just coming in and clamping in, taking that energy, vitamins really aren't going to help, or supplements, or any of those other things. So we'll get to questions in just a little bit.
And they're not, I think that you're just what their comments are. You're really actually confirming their comments. They have this sense that all those things you're describing, they do feel that in their life, and they're recognizing and acknowledging.
Well, another common symptom is when different people in your life cause you to do things that you're really not okay with, but you go ahead and do them anyway. And then you're kind of upset with yourself, and you're like, why do I let myself get talked into these things? Or why am I manipulated into these things? Because that's exactly what they're doing. There's an energy feeding and manipulation taking place. You're going along with it. Another one is feeling an overwhelming sense of obligation or responsibility, like you have to take care of them. Well, a lot of times they put that on you, that, if it wasn't for you, I don't know what I would do, or if you really love me, you're supposed to do this for me, or whatever it is. They're putting, nobody can do it like you, and they're putting this responsibility on you. That's energy feeding. And the other important point is, that there's energy feeding going on when you just can't seem to find your way out. You feel either confused or disoriented. You want to make some changes in your life, but you just don't know how. You feel like you're in this trap and in a fog, and you just don't have the mental clarity. Well, because again, this feeding takes place at all different levels: psychic, physical, mental, emotional, and then you just find yourself in a big fog. So now let's talk about who they might be. And again, caution here, it's not about blaming anyone. It's taking a look at the relationships in your life, what you're actually attracting into you. Oftentimes, it's a spouse or partner. Oftentimes, it's because you came into a relationship because you might have felt incomplete yourself. So you're partnering or you're married to someone, and they love you and they don't intend to do it, but a lot of times they're really feeding on you. And it happens a lot. It happens a lot. Your kids. Yeah, I know you love your kids. Well, yes, you love your kids, and they might drive you crazy at times, but kids, your children, have a way of also feeding on you, and because of the love you have in your heart for them, you actually allow it. Like, I know a lot of you listening in tonight think, well, I have a lot extra, so I'll let people take from me. Children do that a lot.
Jeff, that's a really strong thing to keep in mind, that a lot of this feeding happens because we allow it. They're not necessarily it doesn't have to be deliberate. It occurs, and we allow it.
Absolutely. Parents are another one. Parents tend to actually start feeding on their children, particularly as they get older. I know a lot of people who have had parents that were really more like the children in the relationship, and literally are still feeding on the children, putting a lot of responsibility or burden on them, a lot of guilt and other things. So parents oftentimes have a way of feeding on you as well. I just from my own personal example, I know that just in my family, there was a tremendous responsibility I had when I was younger, and I made a lot of decisions not based on what I was choosing for joy in my life, but what I could do to, quote unquote, help my parents. And ultimately, they have to take responsibility for their own lives. So this was a type of energy feeding that I bought into for a while. And I have to point out that once I let that go, I learned I got to know my parents in a whole different way. I just didn't allow the feeding to go on anymore. And then I really got to understand who they were. Energy feeding happens a lot of times in what you would consider close friends. You know, particularly the friends that like to dump on you, like to tell you about all their problems, all their woes. Have you ever considered, do they ask you how you're feeling? Do they have solutions to their own problems, or are they just trying to dump the problems on you? Do they actually look you in the eye when they're talking? Are they even aware that you're there? Because so often there's people who are doing this feeding that it doesn't matter who it is, sorry to say. It doesn't matter who it is. It's just they need somebody to dump on, and, well, you've been letting them do that. The office workplace is a tremendous place for feeding. I mean, you have all the dynamics of the business world. You have all the people that you're working with and the games. You know, I had a boss at one time was a big energy feeder, now that I stand back and realize it. And the way he did it was through intimidation. He loved to intimidate people in the company, and that kind of put them at a disadvantage and allowed him to do his feeding, made him think how great he was, what a he was the CEO of the company, but it was really just a lot of energy feeding.
Well, he was really abusive, and he made people feel really bad, and he fed off of it.
Absolutely. And that's the way he got to people, would be to kind of to put them down, belittle them, insult them. And then, when that happens, of course, as everyone knows, when you're that vulnerable, then the energy feeding really takes place. There's also, take a deep breath with this one, but there are deceased beings, people that that may have crossed over, gone to the other side, but they're still kind of hanging around because of the dynamics in their life or in the family that they left behind, and they're still lingering. There's a type of psychic energy feeding that can still take place, even though they're no longer here on Earth. And again, if you've had strange dreams about them, if you've felt their presence a lot of times, but maybe not in the most loving way, maybe in a needy way, they still may be feeding, even if they've gone to the other side. And then there are entities who you may not have known. Entities can kind of float around, and a lot of times they do feeding as well. That's kind of a psychic intrusion on your life, because there's something that you have, you've allowed yourself to open up and to let other people feed into you. So this can happen as well. And I'm not talking here about cases of possession, where they come and take over your body. That's another teleclass some night. That hardly ever happens. But there are people who do a lot of feeding off of you. Now I'd like you to stop for a moment and take a look at who you might be feeding off of. Take a look at some of the people in your life. Are there people who you're going to and dumping your problems? Are there people without coming up with solutions? Are there people who you might manipulate, maybe not even consciously, but just at some level manipulating? Who are the people that you might be playing games with in your life?
I think it's a good time to take a really deep breath in this moment and just really let yourself feel into that in your life. When does that occur?
When does that occur? Does it happen at work? Does it happen with even the people you know and love? Is there any type of energy feeding going on there? You know, it's kind of a very simple premise. If you're a victim, no matter to what degree, but if you're a victim of people feeding on you, taking your energy, if you've ever been a victim of physical abuse, violence, if you've ever been a victim of sexual abuse, you're probably also feeding off of others. You're probably also an abuser. Because if people are taking from you, sooner or later, you're going to feel the need to take from others. And again, not deliberately, not in any mean, negative way, but just for survival.
Jeff, I'd like to throw in something here. There's a comment here that matches that in a very interesting way. Somebody has written in and says, I'm a counselor working in a shelter for women fleeing abuse. I see the energy feeding even among the women in the shelter, as well as when I do one-on-one counseling with clients. After an hour or more of listening to and working with these victim clients, when they eventually leave the office, I feel emotionally and physically drained. This counselor clearly is feeling that here, these are the people that she's trying to assist that are the abused, that she feels like she's being fed upon by them and that they feed on each other.
You know, and not to, that's absolutely right. And, you know, there's people that will do that on a regular basis. They're just feeding. They get into that pattern and that cycle. We've seen cases actually with people who get sick with a long-term illness or disease, and they actually at times use that with their family and their friends. Oh, poor me, I've got this illness or disease. And I'm not saying that every illness or disease, you have to feel into the situation, but they'll actually use it for energy feeding, and they'll make you feel guilty if you don't buy into it. As this woman writes in, working with people who have been sexually abused, they're definitely victims, but they're definitely abusers also. They'll get it in other ways, through guilt, through poor me, through, you know, all these different ways. It might not be overt, it might not be something in your face, but there are patterns of energy feeding taking place.
Feeding begets more feeding.
Feeding begets feeding. And as you're also contemplating in your own life where you might be feeding, Linda and I have noticed, and we talk about in some of our classes, about energy feeding that takes place on large-scale bases, not just in one-on-one relationships, but, you know, we've seen it. We were watching a TV news report the other night about the very high incidence of suicide with reality show celebrities. What has that got to do with feeding? Well, you know, why would somebody want to be a reality show celebrity in the first place? Well, because it's attention, it's energy, it's you know, people watching them on TV, following their lives, and when the show stops, the feeding that they're doing stops, and they can't handle it anymore. There's a very high percentage of suicides for people who have been in show business. Sports figures, particularly retired sports figures, they've, at one level or another, have been doing a lot of energy feeding. All that media and the attention and, you know, people just wanting to shake their hand and get their autograph and putting them up on a pedestal. Well, when that goes away, their feeding stops and they go into depression. They go on drugs. They get involved in sexual issues. By the way, I'm going to throw that in while we're talking about it. And we could, again, talk about this at great length, but ask you to take a look at your own sexual relations with other people. And that is probably the pinnacle of feeding if it's going to happen. When you're sharing in that most intimate, loving, physical experience with another person, if there is an energy manipulation going on, they can really do it at that point. In other words, is this experience that you're having with them loving? Is it fulfilling for both? Is it sharing? Is it joyful? Is it joyful? Or is it something where you can feel the feeding going on? Because that's the most intimate time and place that we have as humans, is during sex with someone else.
There are some questions here with people trying to understand what is the difference between a normal relationship, a normal exchange perhaps between a husband and wife, parents and children, versus a feeding experience. What's the difference of those? What is it? What makes it feeding is what people are asking.
What makes it feeding? That's a really good question. You're going to feel it more than anything. You're going to feel if somebody's, not in your brain, but in your heart, in your stomach. You're going to feel. Are they manipulating you? Are they making you feel guilty? Are they making you feel like you're not doing enough for them? Do they tell you what you should or shouldn't do in your life? Or are they free? Do they accept you and love you for what you are? I mean, that to me is the epitome of a relationship. But if there's a lot of games going on, if they're not trusting, if they're always putting things on you, if they're putting you down, or always dumping their problems, or always telling you, basically putting you in a place of taking responsibility for them, serving them, then there's probably feeding going on. And, it happens all the time. I mean, it happens in all the relationships, but hopefully you'll start becoming more aware of this feeding that's taking place and be able to put a stop to it. So let's get to that right now. We have about 20 minutes left, and I want to get to that part, and then let's come back to the questions. So how do you prevent this energy feeding from taking place? How do you stop others from feeding on you, or you feeding on them? It's really, really easy. You make a conscious choice. Make a conscious choice to stop. You don't have to do any fancy ceremonies. You don't have to do anything else. Just make a conscious choice, a very clear, conscious choice. I want the feeding to stop. No more feeding. And then what's going to happen is start being aware of when people are taking your energy, and start being aware of when you're taking others. And it will start to become very, very obvious. Little things like you're suddenly watching the news one night and you'll suddenly say, I'm being fed on by the news. It does that. It really does, because there's a lot of drama in the news. And even though it's not a person, it's a kind of a mass consciousness that's literally feeding on you. Creates anxiety. I can't remember the last time I watched the news and felt happy. Creates anxiety, confusion, disorientation, doubt. There is a feeding going on. And again, it's not intentional, but it's just the way things are. You start to become aware when other people, one of the common signs is when you're talking to somebody and they keep grabbing your arm and you're kind of like trying to kind of back away a little bit to, maintain your space, and they're just grabbing your arm or kind of blocking you so you can't move at all. Well, that's feeding. You'll start becoming aware of when people are doing it. So again, make that conscious choice to stop the feeding.
One of the most obvious examples is even the whole arena with politics and politicians. They're absolutely feeding off of the attention and the drama of everything that they're doing, particularly during election time.
Oh my gosh! We just got through elections here in the U.S., midterm elections, and the feeding that was taking place in the media and in the commercials, and politicians and politics. They, sorry to say, but they survive on energy feeding from people. They really, really do. But as you make a conscious choice that you're no longer going to be in this, you start actually disconnecting from the game. You disconnect from the game. Well, what's going to happen is the feeders are going to sense that within you, and they're actually going to try to probe harder at first. Like, hey, what's wrong with this person? They've always been a kind of a meatloaf dinner for me, and now I'm not getting anything. So they're going to probe a little harder. Just keep breathing. You don't have to do white light around you. You don't have to, wear any special clothing or do any special things. It's just about a conscious choice. They're going to actually back away. They're going to go find somebody else to feed off of because you've disconnected from the game. And then any time that you feel the need to feed, I like that, the need to feed. Anytime that you feel that you have to kind of get that feeding from someone else, stop for a moment. Take a deep breath. Go within yourself. Remember what we said earlier? Everything that you need is already there. Your battery, your internal energy battery, recharges itself by itself. Doesn't need to go outside. Doesn't need to get it from another person. Doesn't need to get it from anywhere. It's already there. And if you don't believe it, at least try it. At least take a deep breath. At least go within. It's what we call the I am principle. It's already there within you. Once you re-acknowledge that, it's going to ignite that energy within you, and it's going to start growing, and you're going to realize you don't have to play the game, and others can't play it with you anymore. That is the simple, easy answer. I know that we could talk about this for a long, long time, but make a conscious choice to stop the cycle of feeding. Then start becoming aware when others are doing it. And that doesn't mean you have to suddenly stop them and say, hey, you're feeding off of me, because they're going to deny it. Just take a deep breath and just disconnect. In other words, they've got their, if you can imagine, kind of energy tentacles into you. And when they do, you have your tentacles into them as well in one way or the other. Just disconnect. Bring back those tentacles, release whatever they have into you. You know, we're all sovereign beings. We've just kind of forgotten about it. We're all absolutely sovereign. We don't need to base our relationships on feeding. We don't need to base relationships on being victims and abusers. Everything that you have is already there. And you know, it will change the way you relate to other people. It will change the way you relate to the world. The world's no longer going to be taking away from you. You don't need to take anything from the world. Can you imagine in this world, if people started to recognize their own sovereignty, their own sense of self-love and self-worth, and this feeding cycle stopped? Oh, it'd be amazing. So let's
as soon as you start to become aware.
It really does. And through this sexual energy school that we started doing, and now we have certified teachers all over the world that do it. After doing it a number of times, Linda made a statement to me one day. She said, I'll never see things the same again, because she, like you, will start to recognize where the feeding is taking place. Even people that you dearly love and that dearly love you are doing it unconsciously. It's an old pattern, it's an old game, and it's time for it to stop. So Linda, what are some of the other questions or comments?
Oh my goodness, there's all kinds of things here. Just a second.
And while you're looking, let me just mention.
Here. My husband's called me lazy for the entire 45 years of our marriage, but I'm just exhausted all the time, can barely do more than breathe. When he leaves the house, I feel wonderful and full of energy. That's the time I manage to do all the housework I can, but as soon as he walks in the door, I'm like a rag doll again. What can I do to change this?
Yeah, and that's a perfect example of energy feeding. And I have to say that the person who wrote this,
who's feeding?
Well, the person who wrote it is allowing it to take place. And for a lot of years, you recognize the problem, and that's good. You recognize what's happening. But now at this point, you have to say no more. You don't have to say that to him. You don't have to say it to anybody else. Just say it to yourself. I make a clear choice. Nobody's going to feed off of me anymore. Now, at some psychic level, he's going to feel that that's going on, and he's not going to like it. But first of all, it's important that you be happy, that you really be in your own light. And then it's up to him. Does he want to keep playing the game, or does he want to stop? So the question you ask is, well, first of all, in your letter you said he calls you lazy. Just imagine for a moment, is somebody walks up to you and calls you stupid, just calls you stupid, that's kind of a shock. And when that happens, you suddenly kind of drop all any barriers that you have, and you open up. And that's when they go in and start feeding. That's when all that takes place. So that's another way to understand when people are calling you names, when your parents would even call you names, or a spouse or anybody else. If they're calling you, the question I have to ask that I'm just feeling other listeners are asking, why do you keep putting up with it? If that's how you feel, what is the relationship giving you?
Well, is that a relationship?
Well, it is, but is it a relationship that you want? What if you had a relationship, even if it was only with yourself, that was about love, that was about honor and joy? You have to ask yourself, why are you in a relationship where you feel that way? When he's there, you feel depleted and drained, and when he walks out the door, you're in your joy. Well, maybe it's time that you took a look at how your own victimness is a type of feeding as well. So in other words, you're probably an abuser also. You may not see it right now, but part of you is probably feeding on him. I wonder if he walks out the door going, oh my gosh, I feel so much better when I walk out the door. So, and we all do it. We're all the victim. We're all the abuser. And the real key to this is the recognition that you have it within you, everything within you. You don't need to go outside to feed. You don't need to let anybody feed off of you anymore. You have everything you need within you.
A number of people are asking, how does this apply when it's a non-physical feeding?
And that's actually fascinating when it's a non-physical being. First of all, I want you to recognize that just because somebody is not in physical form, and in other words, they're kind of a spook or whatever, they cannot read your thoughts more than another human. They don't have any other powers. They may try to lead you to believe that they do, but they don't. They're just dead. I mean, they just don't have a physical body. So when you make a clear conscious choice and say no beings, no entities, no animals, no anything can feed off of me anymore, you suddenly change your own dynamics within yourself. You're not like raising a big flag saying, hey, feed on me. And that's kind of what you're doing if you have these entities hanging around. They see how you get into this victim energy, the poor me energy, and so they come in and they feed as well. Make it very clear. Make it very, very clear. Feeding not allowed. And I don't care if you hear them say back to you that they're not leaving. You make it very clear. You are the sovereign being. You are God also. And just confirm to yourself that you're not going to allow that anymore. You know what? They go away. They really do. You know why? Because they're going to go find somebody who's an easy target. You've basically said, I'm not going to allow this to happen, and sooner or later they do go away. Other questions?
Oh, there's all kinds of amazing questions here.
How would you summarize some of them?
That's what I'm trying to do. Is it appropriate to make someone aware that you perceive them as a vampire in your life? Is that appropriate?
I wouldn't actually, because they're going to deny it, or it sets up a different type of feeding dynamic. They're just going to get more subversive about it. They're going to get more manipulative at other levels about it. So I really wouldn't. It goes back to each of us. We have to take ownership. We have to make a clear choice not to allow feeding in our lives anymore. By the way, I want to point out another real quick feeding example. I know everybody runs into it. So you go shopping, you walk into the store, and you're having a good day. You're feeling great. Everything's wonderful. Pretty soon, you've got a headache. You're feeling tired. You're feeling drained. You're feeling a little disoriented.
You feel like that when you shop? Not me.
No, but what you're doing is you're actually picking up on other people's feelings and feedings. And in a way, you're kind of letting, people you don't even know kind of feed on you. But once you make that clear choice and say, no more, it's not going to happen anymore, all of those energy patterns start to go away.
This is a question that I think is kind of general and it covers a lot. The issue is I'm having with my mother and sister is about feeding. Are they feeding on me or me on them? What's going on?
Generally, anytime somebody's feeding on you, you're feeding on someone else. Now, it may not be them. You may be displacing that and putting it in other people, like your friends or other people in your life. But there's almost a one-to-one relationship. If you're a victim, at some level, you're also the abuser. You're going out trying to get that energy to because you're tired, you're worn out, you're dragged down. And I'm not saying every problem in life is caused by this, but we've noticed over the 10 years and traveling around the world doing workshops, this is one of the biggest issues, energy feeding.
And I have several people concerned saying, how do you really balance the energies when it comes to your own children and vice versa?
Actually, this is a great opportunity to really bring the relationship with your children up to the next level, because you have been in a situation of feeding and being a feeder. When your children were brought into this world, into your life, they just picked up on that. They intuitively sensed that, and they got into that as well. But when you make a clear choice within yourself and say, I am that I am, I'm a sovereign being, I don't need to feed, they're going to sense that as well. It'll change the relationship you have with them. It's no longer, I guess the word would be, no longer codependent. And that's really what feeding is. Feeding is a codependency.
Well, and again, it kind of, at the end, we talk about this a lot, but truly, once you feel really complete and truly love yourself and whole within yourself, it's very hard, much harder for the feeding to occur because there's not much to feed on.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I just looked at my watch. I'm shocked that we only have about 3 minutes left. I thought we had a lot more than that. But so I'm going to make a couple of statements here as a wrap-up. If you want to be notified of any of the Crimson Circle activities, just go to www.crimsoncircle.com. Just sign up for it's our mailing list. We only send 2 things a month. One is a monthly newsletter. The other is a reminder of events, so you won't be inundated with all sorts of different emails.
I would like to add one more time. I know we don't want to, it's not about being promotional, it's about being clear. If this really, truly is a topic in your life, truly an issue in your life, and you would like to go through an experience that supports going beyond this, really the Sexual Energy School is truly an amazing experience to really support you in that journey to move beyond feeding and to find that love of self space.
The Sexual Energy School was initially designed and created for people who were victims of sexual abuse. It really went deep into the issues of abuse, but as Linda mentioned, that we learned that it's not just for people that were sexually abused, it's any type of abuse, and it gets into a lot of detail. It's a 3-day class, and the people that have taken the class, as I mentioned before, 2/3 have said it is absolutely life-changing. It's called the Sexual Energy School, and again, it's really not about sex. However, we talk about the sexual balance, the masculine, the feminine, why that imbalance has created the whole need for feeding. And in the school, it talks really about how to return back to a place of love within yourself, because ultimately, the love for yourself is what's going to release all this feeding, this victim energy, and this abuse energy that's taking place. So you can find all that on our website at www.crimsoncircle.com. I can't believe how quickly this hour has gone by.
Oh, that's because it's a topic that we have so much passion about. You and I know what we've learned from it and the difference it can make in anyone's life to really be aware of this and to bring your life to a fuller and truly more rich, balanced place.
So please take a look in your own life. Be aware at where the feeding is. Don't blame anyone. Don't blame yourself. Take a look at who you might be feeding on. And if you're ready, make a clear, conscious choice that people aren't going to be taking your energy anymore. Make a clear, conscious choice that you have everything within you already. You don't need to go anywhere else. So with that, from Colorado, United States, and the Rocky Mountains on this chilly pre-winter evening, we want to send everybody our love and blessings. We want to thank you for being here, and we want to thank you for all the work that you do to make this world a better place. Thank you, and good night.
Good night.